Great. Good morning, everybody. It's great to join you here on the territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people for the leadership gathering. We have more than 200 First Nations participating in some way here in the gathering with the provincial government. There are going to be more than 1,300 meetings over the course of the gathering. And the whole purpose of this is to ensure that our provincial government is working in close partnership with Indigenous people across the province. I'm very grateful to be joined here today by representatives of leadership groups from Indigenous people across the province. We've got the Leadership Council here joining for today's press conference, and I'm very glad to be joined by them. We have some very significant challenges in this province. In terms of day-to-day life, housing's expensive. We've got a toxic drug crisis. It's taking lives and it's badly injuring people. People are finding they have less money left at the end of the month as a result of global inflation and high interest rates. And we also now have the threat of 25% tariffs coming from our friends, family, and neighbors south of the border in the United States. At the same time, we need to grow our economy. We need to ensure that we're delivering high-quality jobs for British Columbians so that they can support their families and respond to all of these challenges, afford housing, afford food. All of these challenges are disproportionately faced by Indigenous people in our province. They have a greater impact on Indigenous communities in terms of the number of people affected and the depth of that impact. And those will absolutely be topics that are canvassed and covered in our meetings over the next couple of days. The good news is we have everything we need here in this province to overcome these challenges, to work together to address them. We've got amazing resources. We've got incredible people. We've got exceptional educational institutions. We've got a stable political culture. And on days like today, I'm reminded of the importance of governments working together as our government works with First Nations to advance the interests of our people. When you put this all together, there's no way that we will not be successful. And that's what today's meetings are about. I'm very proud of the work we've done together in this province. We've delivered over $500 million in shared gaming revenue. We built or have in process more than 3,000 units of housing for Indigenous people, both on and off reserve. We've delivered in partnership. Some of our largest housing projects that we have underway are in partnership with First Nations. Our recent call for energy, clean energy across the province, every single one of the $5 billion worth of projects are at least 50% owned by Indigenous people. In the mining sector, major mines either co-owned or in partnership with Indigenous people, including the Artemis Blackwater mine and KSM, new mines that are opening up, major energy projects that are entirely owned by Indigenous people. There are, without question, lots of discussions, lots of important work to do going forward, but there's also remarkable success that we have delivered. Agreements with nations around supporting children, around self-governance, around land management. It's an exciting time. It is a vibrant time. And it's a time of great challenges that we will only be able to overcome together, and that's why I'm so glad to be here with these leaders here today. With that, I'd like to pass the microphone over to Regional Chief Teegee to bring remarks. And Regional Chief, I'll pass to you.
First of all, I want to acknowledge the territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh and thank them for allowing us in their territory. Thank you, Premier Eby. Certainly happy and excited to work with you and your government on this new mandate of the NDP government. And as part of the First Nations Leadership Council, our annual First Nations leadership gathering, a record in terms of numbers of meetings, 1,300 meetings. All 204 First Nations have been registered. Over 1,500 delegates will be here at this annual meeting, and it is a record And certainly it's indicative of how important this relationship is to many of the First Nations across this province, and certainly part of that is building upon this relationship that we've created for many, many years in terms of, I think, really what is a cornerstone to our relationship is the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and our work that we are doing to align many of the provincial laws with DRIPA. As a part of this relationship, too, is to have our First Nations chiefs and delegates and communities to meet with the many ministers, and that is a record in terms of how many meetings that there will take place over the next couple of days, 1,300 meetings, and certainly part of that is child welfare, mining, forestry, and many of the ministries that this government is in charge of, and a part of our for many First Nations across this province is to our ability to take care of our lands, is to have the proper, I think really in terms of when we're talking about environmental assessments and or abilities to approve projects, is to have First Nations not only consulted, but perhaps even further to that, have consent-based decision-making. So I look forward over the next couple of days, and certainly a big part of that is discussions with the province of BC. And I think, a day later, after we witnessed the inauguration of President Donald Trump, I think it's really important also to be a part of the discussions, is to see what that relationship looks like in terms of the United States, Canada, and really on the federal side, as part of the work that I do as part of Assembly of First Nations, is the implementation of the United Nations Declaration Act federally. And as we move forward, I think many of the discussions and or what we're hearing from President Donald Trump is the threat of tariffs. And certainly we need to be a part of those discussions as First Nations. And we need to all react collectively to protect the interests, the rights of our First Nations here in Canada and also in British Columbia. So that being said, I look forward to the next couple of days and pass the microphone to my colleague from the First Nations Leadership Council, from the executive of the First Nation Summit, Chief Cheryl Casimer. Thank you.
Thank you, Regional Chief. I'm Cheryl Casimer, Political Executive with the First Nations Summit and a member of the BC First Nations Leadership Council. I am a citizen of the Tanakha Nation. My Tanakha name is Aksmaknik Bitsak Balki. I'm very happy to be here today and want to first of all acknowledge the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples and acknowledge them for allowing us to be here over the next few days to do this important work. I want to also acknowledge Premier and his cabinet for taking the time to meet with us for this annual First Nations Leadership Gathering, where a number of us from across the province are coming here today to talk about some really important issues that are impacting the lives of our people on the ground. As my colleague, Regional Chief Terry, had indicated, is that it's indicative of how important a lot of these issues are to us to see the high number of people who have registered to be here today. As a newly elected chief of my community as well, I'm also here to have meetings one-on-one with some of the ministers to address some of the areas that are of priority and importance to us, such as housing and child and family and environmental concerns, and just a range of issues that decisions that this government makes has an impact or has the potential to impact the livelihood and our homelands back at home. So it's really important that we have a really strong relationship with the provincial government. I'm really happy that the NDP were able to form government again, but I think that it's also, we need to be cognizant of the fact that we are in volatile provincial or political and legal landscape given our neighbors to the south with the Trump administration. And I think one of the things that we need to remind the provincial government and Canada as well is that when you're sitting at the table as going forward as Team Canada, it can't be a Team Canada if you don't have a strong contingent of First Nations leadership sitting at that table with you, because we are talking about our lands, we're talking about our territories, and we need to be decision makers and we need to have a voice in terms of what's happening there. If we do that properly, we can be strong allies moving together as we sit down and talk about these issues, these potential tariffs, and whatever else the Trump administration is talking about. But coming back here at home and what's happening on the ground, I think we need to continue to apply pressure to the provincial government in terms of reconciliation efforts that need to continue to happen. I stated earlier today to the Premier that I saw a lack of the spirit and intent of reconciliation in a number of the mandate letters that have just been provided to the ministers within this provincial cabinet. And that is a bit concerning to me as a First Nation chief and as a First Nation leader. When you take a look at the mandate letters from the previous government, reconciliation was threaded through the whole thing. It was embedded everywhere, and it was a strong directive to the ministers to work closely with First Nations. And we need to make sure that that continues to happen. We need to do that to ensure that we're going to have continued certainty within this province. You want to attract investments to come into this province, we need to do that in partnership with each other between the provincial government and First Nation leadership and governments in this province. It's the only way that we're going to be able to move forward, because when First Nations people succeed in this province, everybody does. So without taking out further time, thanking you for the opportunity to share a few words, and I will now introduce Grand Chief Stewart Phillip.
Why pisnaksil squeeze siut. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here to offer a few words to the importance of what's become known as the First Nations Leadership Council. I'm absolutely thrilled and proud to say we're on the doorstep of celebrating our 20th anniversary on March the 15th coming up. And we've managed to come from a very divisive, acrimonious, conflictual relationship to being one of the most effective political unified force across the country. And I'm so proud of that. And what it took was for our organizations with vastly different mandates to come together, to all of us get off our high horses and walk together for the betterment of our children and families and the well-being of our people. With the John Horgan and David Eby governments, we've made great accomplishments over the last number of years. And we are very, very supportive and very hopeful that we can continue with that good work. One of the centerpieces, of course, of that work was DRIPA, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. In many ways, that represents the bedrock, the foundation of our relationship. And we need to continue that unified approach to the many, many issues that confront not only First Nations people, but all British Columbians. We are living in perilous times, and as each hour, each day goes by, the uncertainty continues to grow. We have a government in the United States that is absolutely unbalanced, and that's going to impact us. The Trump government has already very boldly expressed their interest in acquiring our water, our minerals, and control, and has threatened tariffs that would absolutely crush the economy. Now more than ever, we need to come together in British Columbia. We need to unify. We need to go back to the beginning where we helped each other out. It was based on economic independence, our first relationship, and that needs to continue. This meeting, this First Nations leadership gathering is becoming more and more and more important as time moves forward, as is the UBCM and other meetings like that, where we can come together and network and find ways and means of supporting each other. So I'm hoping that the entire province can get behind the essential need to unify for the common good of our citizenry and our peoples and the integrity of our institution. So with that, I just want to finish by saying that the media plays an incredibly important role in all of that. And, you know, I'm hoping that we all, as grandfathers and fathers and uncles and aunts and so on, realize that, you know, when I say we live in perilous times, we need to wake up to that fact. We need to fully understand the gravity of where we're at right now. Right, Lynn?
Thanks, Grand Chief. I'm also joined here today by Minister Christine Boyle, who's recently taken on the role of Minister responsible for Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation. Hit the ground running. She came to provincial government from the city of Vancouver, where she was responsible for implementation of the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People at the municipal level. And she's meeting a lot of folks and building a lot of relationships. And so just wanted to welcome her to the role and to the gathering today. With that, happy to take questions from the media.
Thank you, Premier, and thank you everyone for joining us today at the First Nations Leadership Gathering. Just a note for the media that the Premier will be available again over the noon hour to discuss matters related to tariffs, so please save any questions on that topic till then. For media here in person, please line up at the mic stand and state your name and outlet, and we have media on the phone lines as well, so press *1, and all reporters will have one question and one follow-up. We'll start here on the floor.
Hi, Monica Gould with City News. First question would be open to any of the chiefs. You've all mentioned the tariff threat. Hoping to get a bit more reaction on the tariff threat, if there are particular industries or sectors you're most concerned about. And also, if you could talk a little bit more about how you feel the province has been involving First Nations when it comes to planning how to respond and address the tariff threat.
Thanks, Monica. I think, you know, one of the things that is really made acutely front of mind for all British Columbians right now is that we must be united at this time. We are a relatively small market here in British Columbia compared with the United States. We are heavily dependent on trade for our provincial economy. And that is consistent with the history of this province from time immemorial. The trading relationships that ran across North America among Indigenous people have been there for as long as human history. And so the reminders of those deep ties that we have across North America that predated the border between Canada and the United States, the importance of governments working together, the importance of British Columbia sticking together at a time of threats is underlined both by our history and by our present. I'll pass it over to Regional Chief to respond.
Thank you for that question, and certainly I think the reason that many First Nations, not only in British Columbia but across this country, are concerned is our dependence, and perhaps even more so, especially indicative here in British Columbia, is our involvement in the resource economy. In particular, there are many First Nations that not only have an equity stake in forest industry, but also within mining. And I think that's where we'll see the issue of tariffs, that these, whether we like it or not, across British Columbia and across Canada, a lot of the industry that we're a part of is resource-based, and certainly a big part of that is, perhaps tariffs will take a hit in terms of the costs to the industries, in terms of natural resource industries, and that would definitely cause a downturn. And I'm not sure if the citizens of the United States understand the implications of tariffs, and the costs will be borne on them as well. If these tariffs do come to pass, that these costs are increased, and perhaps going forward that there'd be a downturn in many of the resources industries that we're a part of here in British Columbia, whether that's forestry, mining, or what have you. And that will affect our economy. So this is really important, why we should be a part of these discussions, and perhaps working together with the provincial and federal governments for a response. I think it's really important that not only that that a lot of the energy that comes out of Canada is going to the United States, and certainly there's a dependence on both sides of the border. And perhaps, it's really important to better understand that perhaps maybe Canada, British Columbia, that we diversify our markets, that we're not completely dependent on the United States, that we do have other relationships that we're part of in terms of other countries in Asia and Southeast Asia. And what's very concerning too is President Trump's views of Canada-United States Free Trade Agreement, CUSMA, which as part of the Assembly of First Nations, I was part of the economic development portfolio, and we did have many meetings with Minister Freeland at the time, and putting forward a position from First Nations in Canada to have free trade, not only recognize First Nations, but recognize Indigenous rights. We really tried to implement the declaration on that level. We did have some success, and certainly as Trump also is looking to repeal CUSMA and renegotiate, we see it as perhaps maybe a threat to erode what we've already created there, and not recognize our Indigenous rights and First Nations rights here in this country. So certainly I think as part of this province and First Nations part of this country, we need to be working together. Thank you.
Do you have a follow-up, Monica?
Yeah. Oh.
Thank you for the question, and I just wanted to add my 2 cents worth for whatever it may be worth. I think that it's really important, as I stated in my comments, that there needs to be the understanding that First Nations are owners of lands here in this province, and that there is recognition of our rights and our title to these lands. And having said that, that is why we need to be full partners, sitting at the table with whomever government it is, maybe the provincial government or the federal government, in terms of decisions being made about what happens to these lands and what happens to these resources. We need to be good stewards of these lands. We need to make sure that these lands and the resources that it provides are available not only to us today, but to our future generations. And that's why it's critical that we sit at the table. We have not yet been approached to be participants in any discussion related to what's happening with tariffs. As I stated earlier, we haven't been invited to be part of Team Canada yet. And that's why I just really want to emphasize the importance of that needing to happen. That needs to take place before any further discussions continue. continue to advance. Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves in a situation where there could be potential conflict, and we don't want that. We can't afford that here in Canada right now. We need to be allies. We need to be working together, because the Trump administration, we just really don't know what's happening with it. And as long as we're prepared and working together, I think we can have a strong position moving forward. Thank you.
Follow-up, Monica?
Sure. I guess maybe a response from the Premier about feeling from First Nations that they aren't full partners as it stands on when it comes to addressing the tariff threat.
Yeah, I think for our discussions, thanks. For our discussions over the next couple of days, without a doubt, the impact of tariffs and tariffs will be a key part of the discussion that ministers are engaging in with nations. They're very front of mind for all Canadians right now. I think that Leadership Council raises a really important point about making sure that at all tables that Indigenous leadership is present when decisions are being made about land, about energy, about issues that may affect Indigenous people. We recognize Indigenous governments and their roles and responsibilities in our province and their rights and title. And as part of that, it's a good reminder that from the summit that we need to make sure that Indigenous leaders are present at those tables.
Thank you, Premier. We'll stay here on the floor. Do you have a question?
My turn to lower the mic. Hi, good morning. I'm Julie Landry with Radio-Canada, French CBC. The question is for one or two or three of the chiefs and also Premier Eby. This morning, Premier Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith said that we need to diversify our economy. And she said that in order to do that, we have to do major nation building projects, whether it's Northern Gateway getting restarted. So she did speak about that. And I remember First Nations fight against Northern Gateway. Is that something that could be a potential project that could be reborn here in BC?
Thanks. I think there are different perspectives across Canada about how best to respond to the tariff threats that we're facing. Without question, diversification has to be part of our key strategy. But when you're advancing proposals, I think it's critically important that the provinces where those those projects may be located, the Indigenous people who may be affected, the national government. I think everybody needs to be a part of those conversations. From my perspective, I have some differences of opinion with Premier Smith, but where we are completely aligned is that we need to stick together as a country to defend jobs and economic activity in this province. I don't know if any leaders want to speak specifically on Northern Gateway. It feels a bit speculative at this stage. I understand that. Terry, yeah.
Ooh, you had to go to Northern Gateway. So certainly the Northern Gateway pipeline I was intimately involved in as I used to be the tribal chief of the Carrier-Sakani Tribal Council, and our position at that time was of that really our people and Carrier-Sakani territory were very concerned with the development of a diluted bitumen pipeline, and certainly I'm not aware that we have changed that position in terms of the tribal council and my nation. But nevertheless, I think it was really an important lesson in terms of developments that transect and are linear, that crosses many territories and First Nations territories across, whether it be Alberta or British Columbia, and certainly some First Nations agree with some of the projects, whether it's Northern Gateway or LNG, and there are other First Nations that don't. So that really speaks to the approval process and the ability for First Nations to make decisions. And I think it's really important that we get that right in terms of the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the ability to create a framework of not only provincial and or federal governments to approve projects, but First Nations to be a part of the decision-making process in terms of many of these types of linear projects, and further to that, perhaps even mining and/or forestry. Really, I think we're in the middle of the Leadership Council have intervened on the Ahedasat court case, which speaks to online staking and mining, and that there really needs to be a framework that recognize the ability for First Nations to be a part of the decision-making process as related to the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. And I think it's really important that we get there on many of these types of developments that relate to natural resources. Because in the end, if we don't, the problem is that we end up in court. And for better or for worse, many of these court cases, many First Nations win. But it's not up to the judge to create that relationship between First Nations and the province, or First Nations and federal government. And it's not the ability of a judge to create that relationship. We're forced to create relation. We're forced to create some sort of decision. It's not in the judge's ability to allow projects to move forward. Certainly they can judge on certain cases, but they don't have the wherewithal nor ability to create that space and how projects are approved. So I think, rather than go that route, we need to be proactive and work together and create that space. So I think, one of the positive parts about that is that I know when the amendments were made and provincially with the environmental assessment, is that First Nations have an ability to create their own environmental assessment, and it's happening. I know in the interior that there has been projects that companies have gone through a First Nations environmental assessment process, and they're moving in a good way to approvals of projects and/or ability to create that space. Thank you.
Do you have a follow-up, Julie?
Should be short. It's yeah. Oh, sorry.
That was an excellent question. It pretty much speaks to the relationship we've been speaking about during this session. And as most of you know, I was a person that really fought against the Northern Gateway Pipeline as well as Kinder Morgan. And when I look back on that, that was a different time. We are staring into the abyss of uncertainty right now with climate change, the climate crisis, and the American threat. So I would suggest that if we don't build that kind of infrastructure, Trump will. And there will not be any consideration for the environment or the rule of law or anything along those lines. I think that we can do better. I think we need to do better, and we need to utilize the principles of the relationship between the Leadership Council and government to work our way through these proposals. And we have no choice. So as long as we respect the integrity of the land and the waters and the rights of our people and the interests of other British Columbians in regard to lifting our economy, that's the challenge. And that's why these relationships are so important, that we don't simply go headlong into a conflict, but rather sit down and work these things out. And I believe it can be done. Since those battles that I mentioned, there's been an amazing number of agreements, resource development agreements between our people, government interests, corporate interests, and the benefits of those agreements are clearly evident in our communities. So, again, that was a different time. Thank you.
Thank you, Grand Chief. Julie, you follow up?
A yes and no question. You like these, I know. Would you want the First Nations to be at that Team Canada table on tariffs?
Oh, without question, there needs to be Indigenous representation in the Team Canada discussions. That's certainly not up for debate. And I know, at least for British Columbia, the topic of tariffs and our response to them will be key topics over the next couple of days and going forward with the Leadership Council. So that's not a controversial proposal for British Columbia at all.
And that's all the time we have this morning. Just a reminder to the media on the phone lines that the Premier will be available again at the noon hour. So please join us then. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.